Welcome to the Reclaimability Podcast. This week, the 5 components of nervous system recalibration take center stage. Nervous system recalibration is a structured technique that I have developed, which uses 5 components that are directly impacted by our nervous system response, but that we have the ability to manually adjust. It is a technique of taking an in-the-moment inventory of how we are functioning and recalibrates our nervous system so that it operates more appropriately for the present environment. And this is significantly different from the mainstream understanding of how our nervous systems function, or the mainstream narrative that our nervous systems are only active when triggered. Have you ever had an experience where you were activated by something and someone, maybe a friend, a partner, a therapist, or someone of authority sort of responded with, yeah, just relax, calm down, or I need you to breathe. And I'd just be curious for a moment, what came up for you when you just heard me say that? Quite possibly you tensed up. Even noticing where you tensed up. You elevated a bit from your seat, and your breathing went into the chest more than likely, or maybe even stopped altogether. Perhaps I could even go even further and predict that your thoughts narrowed, almost like zeroing in on my words, or of an image or memory, or of someone else. And I could even guess that you probably not likely to entertain any of those directions. In fact, you're more likely to do the opposite. And certainly I can recall these feelings in particular when I was struggling with my own PTSD, and it made me feel like I wasn't functioning right. And it validated that there was something wrong with me, but that I wasn't able to fix it. This is in part what prompted me to take such a deep dive into the mechanics of our body in response to stress and trauma. I now have over a decade as a trauma therapist and have spent the past 15 years specializing in the body mechanics of our responses to activation. It's through this experience and training and research that I discovered these 5 components and developed the nervous system recalibration technique. I think my light bulb moment around understanding the nervous system in a different way came to me when I was actually working with a client who was referred to me by another therapist to help regulate them. So this client described to me their problem was not that they go from 0 to 60, as we often say, when something triggers them. They said it was more like going from 58 to 60. And suddenly it made so much sense. I mean, perhaps you've even heard of that yourself, or maybe thought of that yourself. But I completely understood what that meant. But I also recognized that they were quite well functioning at their self-prescribed 58. And the problem was that there really wasn't enough flexibility before they reached their peak at 60. So between 58 and 60, there just didn't seem to be enough space to be able to navigate and have nuance, to have sort of different options and different ways of functioning. It became clear to me, though, that regulating one's nervous system is often led by the need or perception of someone else. Your nervous system is responding to something that it is perceiving as a threat. It's perceiving that it's something that needs to be dealt with or fixed. And as soon as someone comes up and says, well, just relax, just breathe, just take it easy, just do all of those things. Basic understanding of the nervous system, sole purpose is to keep the organism alive. It certainly just can't simply change without new information to be able to feed it and let it know how it is supposed to respond appropriately to this new information because the situation looks different. By asking the nervous system to just simply stop and do something differently, it's almost like asking yourself to breathe underwater. It just doesn't make sense, and it seems more dangerous now because it's being misunderstood. So while I can't teach nervous system recalibration on this podcast, I can highlight the components which anyone can apply as a regular practice throughout the day will help you develop the skills to have agency in how your nervous system is functioning. The 5 components to the nervous system recalibration are breathing, rhythm, environment, social engagement, and curiosity. And you've probably heard all of these before, but it's the way that we use them that makes all of the difference. The breathing seems to come up everywhere in the wellness industry. It has become the cliched catchphrase of yoga and meditation, but it is rooted in hardwired body mechanics. that existed long before any sales pitch or treatment package. And it certainly isn't to say that these things aren't valid or don't work well under the guise of yoga or meditation. In fact, they work really well. And it really depends on the practitioner, on their level of understanding of how breathing mechanics work in order for it to be successful. And also depends on the operator themselves. So, as somebody who's participating in it, for example, it also depends on an understanding of how the mechanics work. So, breathing is the actuator of nervous system modulation. This means that the way that we breathe adjusts the fuel or energy between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system. The name autonomic was created because we thought we didn't have any ability or agency in its operation, which in fact we actually do. If you've ever seen a brand new baby breathe, the only thing that actually moves is its stomach. So abdominally, the baby breathes, and it didn't have a manual inside the womb. It didn't take classes while it was waiting to be born. It simply knew how to do it because its body mechanics were built that way. And so it breathes quite incredibly. As it breathes, it takes in air, it breathes into the stomach. Stomach fills up, and then as it breathes out, the stomach compresses once again, and it breathes out carbon dioxide, and then makes more room for more oxygen to come in. Suddenly, it's born. Suddenly, it's inundated with this overwhelming sensation around what we know as the eyes, but it doesn't understand what that is. It's never experienced sharp brightness, and so it becomes inundated with these sensations and data that it's never had to process before. And the same thing comes from its ears. It's suddenly all of a sudden inundated with these sensations that's coming into the ears, but doesn't understand what hearing is. It was muffled and protected. Now it's incredibly coarse and harsh. It doesn't have any understanding of where it's coming from. It's all new data that it hasn't processed before. Its entire body is just inundated with this unbelievable sensation that it's never experienced before. Of course, being in the embryonic fluid, in this womb, temperature controlled by mom, and all these wonderful things. Suddenly, it's exposed to air over its skin, which is the largest sensory organ of our body, and just all this data information is just being flooded into this baby. It shifts in order to go into activation. It needs to do something. I'm surviving, but I need to know how to thrive. I need to know if I'm okay. I don't know. So what it does is it shifts from abdominal breathing into chest breathing, into the chest, and it does its fight or flight response, which is the only thing it can do, and it sends out an attachment cry. It cries out, "Wah!" And so this is the way it's able to survive. And of course, its response is mom or dad or nurse or doctor then go to the baby and respond to the baby and tend to the baby. And the baby learns that, oh, okay, this is okay. All these sensations, it's kind of overwhelming, but socially, I'm learning that it's okay. And it starts to go back into abdominal breathing once it starts to feel safe again. It goes back into, okay, now I can just go back into functioning. The danger is over. And now I need to go back into rest, recover, repair, eat, and digest. And so it does. You can notice in men, but also women, in the posturing up. So if you picture going toe to toe, ready to get into an altercation, their chests puff out, they're breathing heavy into their chest or light and shallow into their chest as they prepare. They're breathing in short doses of oxygen-rich blood into their fight or flight response system. And then, of course, as they resolve the issue, perhaps not even coming to blows, one backs down, and then suddenly what's really interesting, what happens is their breathing shift from a chest breathing to abdominal breathing, and their body starts to go into a parasympathetic response to go back into rest, recover, and repair. The danger is over. I need now to go and switch. And it starts with the breathing. The breathing goes from sympathetic breathing into the chest to parasympathetic breathing to start activating the parasympathetic system, which changes even our chemical composition in our bloodstream to go from adrenaline into sort of the receptors to find out, okay, what was used, what needs repair, and then to prepare to send nutrients to the body for repair after it's been activated. So all of these things are happening with our breath. And if we notice where our breath is and we shift and adjust our breathing, we have the ability to then breathe activation that is more appropriate for the current environment. Holding our breath is that brace for impact, and it can be a survival mechanism which works really well, but the nervous system will hold out, wait and say, okay, what's happening here? How much longer do we have before we have to kick into action? But holding our breath is one of those things that we'll notice. And if you pay attention to your breath, you will recognize when you're holding your breath. Everything in nature is rhythmic. When rhythm is disrupted, imbalance occurs. From a nervous system perspective, it's like the clock starts ticking and it can only wait so long before something breaks. We currently operate under a framework of sort of static analogies when it comes to mental health. Dan Siegel, he's done some phenomenal work and created a groundbreaking model that describes how our nervous systems function called the window of tolerance. It's basically used by everyone that understands trauma, and I use it myself when I describe it to clients. It's kind of become the gold standard of understanding stress and trauma. I do like to use it because it's an easy to follow tool that helps us understand where we are or where our clients are in terms of our nervous system activation. But it is also rooted in the static framework. Homeostasis, which is the center line of balance. In static terms, it's sort of the benchmark of where we want to be. But actually, quite often that can impact the processing in therapy because we're actually focusing more on keeping them in balance rather than the activation. We want to be able to work with the impact, and if we can't feel the impact, then we're not able to process in that work. And if you're outside of that window, as Dan Siegel talked about, then you're not able to process either because then you're in full-on survival mode. But the reality is that we're never static. The internal and external world influenced our nervous system response and adjusted it according to our organism to live. And this is why I've created the allodynamic model, which works with our system the way that it actually operates in constant motion. Allo meaning energy and dynamic meaning options. But we can talk about that in another episode. The reality is that every second, approximately 11 billion pieces of information are being received and delivered to our brain for us to process. But our conscious thinking brain can actually only really process approximately 50 million pieces of this information every second, which is actually pretty good when you think about it. That's a ton of data. But that's also, when you really think about it, there's a ton of data that's left not processed within the, creating the equation for our nervous systems to respond and determine if we're safe or not, if something has to be adjusted in order for us to simply thrive or simply be able to rest, recover, and repair, etc. So there's lots of options to choose from. And in a dynamic system, if we see that there are lots of options to choose from, that means there are lots of options. Rodolfo Linus, who's a Colombian American neuroscientist, has spent many decades researching and contributing to our evolving understanding of the human brain. He has successfully argued that the purpose of the building of the brain was actually not to think. It was to move. Moving was recognized as a revolutionary method of removing an organism from danger. Remember, that is the nervous system's sole purpose, to protect the organism from anything that interferes with its natural ability to simply live. Therefore, thinking developed as a mechanism to coordinate movement. And so this again talks about movement and the critical importance of rhythm, which is the ability to move. All of this to say that we're never static. Static is stuckness. And when we freeze, the clock starts ticking again. The nervous system is alerted and on standby for the move. The longer we are static, the more energy the nervous system stores in anticipation of moving. It associates static with a sitting target. This can be fabricated and harnessed like a rabbit does. Their ninja power, for example, is sitting still. They stay still to avoid detection and wait for the right opportunity to escape. Again, static cues the nervous system to store energy in anticipation of a life-saving move. So being static is something that we fabricate as best we can, knowing that it's completely impossible to be in a 100% static world, but we can kind of withhold or slow things down so that we can actually better prepare for a better survival technique. And then, of course, the ability to move, be rhythmic, is actually actioning that survival technique. The nervous system translates movement as options. Options means the organism is not trapped, may be in danger, but capable of doing something to keep itself safe. It has also been discovered that the cerebellum, which originally was known for its role in muscle control and balance and movement, also carries out almost the same function for cognitive functioning around language and memory. One kind of lubricates the other, meaning that movement enables us to think better. So when we move, we are able to think better, and when we can think better, we are better able to then navigate what's needed from our nervous system to negotiate the environment. And speaking of the environment, when we talk about the environment, we don't often think that there are two, but our nervous system is constantly monitoring and adjusting to both internal and external environments. Our internal environment is the goings on of between 28 and 36 trillion cells, which makes up all of our body. What's more, we play host to approximately 10 times more microbial cells that we must then respond to every moment of the day. This is on top of managing damaged tissues, demand for more energy by way of food consumption and digestion, and of course cleanup by way of waste evacuation, to name just a few of the things that are happening in the internal city of our bodies. All of this must be maintained while simultaneously detecting, identifying, planning for, and responding to the external environment. Temperature, noise, air quality, social engagement, etc. All of these things. The less our nervous system needs to exert energy on, the greater our capacity to take in information from both internal and external environments. And you could think about this even in your own experience. When are you most aware of things that are impacting you? When are you most aware of perhaps how your body as a whole is feeling or operating? When are you most aware of all of the things that are involved in your external environment, including perhaps what that might look like in the future, being able to predict things, or even being curious and playful and imaginative with both the external and external worlds? Typically, those things are only able to happen when your nervous system isn't responding to something that feels like a threat. As your body starts to respond to something that feels like a threat, our ability to take in other parts of the environments start to narrow. And that's because the body does not operate on an unlimited supply of energy, and nor does it have some superpower that simply pulls energy from the sky. Energy comes from glucosamine production by way of digesting food, and that's it. Lisa Feldman Barrett again speaks a lot about this, and she does some great work on just describing the body budget, which is the energy that we have available to us, and quite simply, that's where it comes from. If we don't digest food, we don't have energy to be able to do all of the functions that we need, including nervous system activation. As the autonomic nervous system has the con when it comes to energy allocation, it's also important to realize that is the amount of energy we have available to work with. And it could be something such as being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, but it could also be something else, like simply just having to navigate going to the bathroom. The human brain at rest uses approximately 20% of our body's energy. It's incredibly inefficient. It also is quite time-consuming. So in survival language, our thinking brain is more of a hindrance than an asset, as it takes time and energy, which are the ingredients needed for life or death situations. So the more important or imperative the activation is in order for survival, like instead of, not going to the bathroom, but being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, that demand is going to be significantly more, and it's going to pull it from the areas that are drawing energy that, it's no sense in using that energy for that if we're dead. So it will pull that energy from our cognition thinking brain going into that fight or flight response. And once our nervous system starts to put focus on something, our awareness of the rest of the environment then obviously becomes less, which is really kind of strange and ironic when you think about it, because as our superpower is the thinking brain, the more information we have to chew on and sort out, then the more accurate we can be with our assessment. But suddenly the problem becomes that we have tunnel vision. The less nuances are available to see, and it's impossible to respond accurately to situations if you're unable to see all of that information. A simple example of this is if you suddenly hear a child screaming and a loud, angry roar. Your nervous system might immediately prune away all of the sources of data coming in to really focus on the scream and the roar, maybe trying to identify the child, maybe trying to identify the animal or the creature that's making the roar, to hone in on that information. But it's also pruning away all of the other information from the environment, including your own internal environment, because maybe you were trying to go to the bathroom. But the other information is critical for your nervous system to respond appropriately. As you take the rest of the environment in, you recognize that it's Halloween, for example, and that the child is actively participating in a fun haunted house display. So by making a conscious effort to see what you're not focusing on, you add more reality to the situation, which will allow your nervous system to respond more appropriately. It will change the formula or the math that your nervous system is chewing on to determine and predict what it needs to do. By more appropriately, I don't mean less activated either. Take the same example of the child screaming again. Only this time, imagine it being in your backyard. So hearing a neighborhood child in the backyard with your dog. You know your dog's sound and what it sounds like when it plays. But then as you take in the rest of the environment, you realize that the child has never played with your dog before. And actually, as you start to recognize more, you realize that the child was never invited in your backyard to begin with. And this information will shift your nervous system activation for you to respond more appropriately. Maybe the dog is safe, but the child needs to feel safe and to be cared for. Or maybe something's happened now, suddenly the dog is not safe because the dog feels threatened by this invasion. So taking in this information will be a shift the way that your nervous system is responding to operate more appropriately to that environment. Part of that too is about talking about social engagement. So social engagement is critically important for mammals. We have this incredible capacity to survive. We can survive on our own. John Cacioppo is a cognitive neuroscientist, and he spent 35 years developing or studying loneliness. It's only recently that his loneliness studies have actually come through into the World Health Organization, recognizing loneliness as a significant risk factor in mortality. It's incredible the amount of work that he has done and then developed our understanding of social engagement itself and how it actually works and why it's important. As mammals, our ventral vagal system or our social engagement system is wired to be able to connect with others. So again, we can survive, but surviving is different than thriving. Thriving enables us to know we're able to function in our environment as opposed to just simply survival. What's really quite interesting is that you could be in one of the most scariest situations of your life, and if you look over and you see somebody else who's looking at you and connecting with you, suddenly that situation is still scary, but your ability to function in that situation could be different. And certainly I've seen this in combat operations where we're involved in life or death situations, and we feel very canalized. Suddenly I'm looking into a battlefield and looking at a very specific situation within it. But then as I look around me, I'm making eye contact with my fellow soldiers to my left and right. And suddenly my ability to function in that environment shifts. I feel much more capable and competent in being able to function in that ability. It doesn't change the situation, but what it does is it changes my capacity and ability to thrive in it. So social engagement is critically important. We're designed to be able to connect with others. And so when you look at social engagement in this context, are you able to focus on people? Are you able to see somebody else and actually be able to connect with them? Either there's nobody there to do that with, or is your capacity that you're not able to? It doesn't even have to be a person. We often recognize that with animals. So being able to connect with a dog in the same way, or with a horse. So other mammals that are designed to be in packs or in herds or in groups are also designed the same way. We have the same kind of mechanism, that social engagement system. So being able to be socially engaged can shift the way our nervous systems are operating in any situation. Suddenly we're not alone, and in not being alone, we have more options again. We have more capacity to endure, more capacities to manage or work through a situation. And ultimately, the last one is curiosity. And I speak about curiosity all the time. Curiosity is really the litmus test. You can't fight off a saber-toothed tiger and wonder what the rose smells like. If you're able to wonder what the rose smells like, you have capacity. You have capacity to bring in other pieces of information. You have capacity to shift and change, and to then look at your breathing, to look at the rhythm, to see if you're able to move. You have the capacity to look at other parts of the environment, to take in new data. And you also have the capacity for social engagement. I can reach out, and I can make these choices, and then I can be curious to see how that shifts my nervous system, and if this is appropriate for the environment. While I'm in rush hour traffic, I want my nervous system to be activated appropriately to navigate fast-moving vehicles, aggravated people, multiple traffic lights, and all of the other things that come with driving in rush hour traffic. But I don't want that nervous system to operate that way when I'm sitting on the couch on a Sunday evening reading a good book. So having the capacity to be able to look at the components that bring up indications of nervous system activation, such as breathing, rhythm, environment, social engagement, and curiosity, allows me to then adjust my nervous system to work more appropriately for the current environment. So that's what I have for you from this episode. Next week, we're going to take a look at an amazing veteran who has reclaimed his ability. So Lee Murphy has gone from hopeless addict to ultra marathon runner. He's going to share the choice points that he faced and directions that he took towards his healing. So until then, stay curious. Unlike public institutions or nonprofit organizations, the Atlanta Group and Trauma Training Center uses membership contributions to enable innovative and independent research, publication, program development, and delivery without the bias or influence of outside investors or donators. Got a topic or question? Be part of the contribution by reaching out. We may feature it on one of our episodes. I look forward to learning, growing, and being curious with you.